The wrestling world was still struggling to catch its breath. Less than 48 hours had passed since the tragic announcement rocked sports entertainment to its core. Hulk Hogan, the immortal legend, had died at the age of 71. Across arenas, locker rooms, and social media timelines, a wave of collective grief swept through millions of fans, wrestlers, and personalities who had grown up idolizing the red and yellow warrior who once defined a generation. For many, Hogan wasn't just a wrestler, he was a symbol of invincibility, an embodiment of 1980s charisma, and a constant presence in the wrestling tapestry of America. Hulkamania, once a slogan, had become a lifestyle. And now, its heart had stopped beating, but even in the wake of death, controversy didn't wait. As fans mourned and tributes poured in, an unexpected shockwave hit the community from a direction no one could have predicted, from Linda Hogan, Hulk Hogan's ex-wife. The timing, the tone, and the content of her words sent the internet into an uproar. It wasn't a heartfelt remembrance. It wasn't even a quiet acknowledgement of grief. Instead, Linda Hogan made a public demand that many found unthinkable, offensive even. She wanted a portion of the proceeds from any Hulk Hogan merchandise, tributes, or WWE-produced documentaries following his death, claiming that her legacy was tied to his just as much as his was to wrestling. Within minutes of her statement hitting social media, Hulkamania fans turned on her with the same intensity they once chanted his name with. The backlash was swift, brutal, unforgiving. To many, it was the ultimate betrayal of a grieving fanbase. Linda hadn't been part of Hogan's world for over a decade. Their divorce had been messy, public, and rife with accusations that had fractured what was once considered a wrestling fairy tale. And now, at the very moment the world was trying to honor the man, Linda appeared. Not to grieve, but to claim. The demand came through an Instagram live where Linda, appearing composed and almost indifferent, said, "Hulk Hogan wouldn't be Hulk Hogan without me. I supported him when he was nothing, I raised our kids while he was on the road, and I built a life with him. I deserve recognition, and compensation, for what I endured." Screenshots of her words flooded Twitter and Reddit. Wrestling forums lit up like wildfire. To the public, this wasn't about legacy. It was about timing. Hulk's body wasn't even in the ground yet, and already there were talks of money, rights, and royalties. Fans who had once respected her as part of the Hogan family felt betrayed. Hulk had just died, and the woman who once wore his ring was now trending for what felt like opportunism. Some called it tone-deaf. Others, outright vile. Wrestlers from Hulk's era remained largely silent, but anonymous sources within WWE revealed that many were disgusted behind the scenes. One former WWE producer said bluntly, "It's like the man didn't even die to her. She saw a business opportunity." The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Hulk Hogan had been controversial in life, plagued by lawsuits, leaked tapes, media scandals, and a very public fall from grace. But in the final years of his life, he had been working on a slow redemption arc, appearing at WWE events in small doses, apologizing where he once deflected, and spending more time away from the spotlight than ever before. In those rare moments of honesty, Hogan spoke about his regrets, not just in wrestling, but as a father and as a husband. "I was on the road too much," he once admitted in a podcast. "I wasn't always present." And yet, even in those apologies, there had never been bitterness. Never blame toward Linda. If anything, he had tried to preserve a kind of respectful distance from the very public ugliness of their split. But now that grace was being tested, the public wasn't willing to be so forgiving toward Linda. On X, formerly known as Twitter, #ShameOnLinda began trending within the hour. "How dare she," one post read, "use his death to push herself back into relevance?" Another user wrote, "Hulk Hogan gave us his life. Linda Hogan is trying to take what's left of it." Fans posted clips of Hogan walking to the ring to the roaring sound of Real American, his fists pumping, his bandana pulled tight, contrasting it with clips of Linda's past reality show appearances, moments that now felt shallow in the shadow of death. Yet others pointed to the years of quiet before this. Linda hadn't publicly spoken about Hulk in any real capacity for years. She wasn't part of his last interviews. She didn't attend wrestling events. And when Hulk battled through multiple health scares, including multiple surgeries on his back and hips, Linda was nowhere in sight. It wasn't a crime, of course. They were divorced. They had long gone separate ways. But it was the reappearance, now, in the very hour of mourning, that struck fans as grotesque. It was as if she had been waiting. Watching. And once the death was confirmed, she stepped into the light, not to cry, but to collect. Wrestling journalists scrambled to find context. Was this part of a legal dispute? Did Linda Hogan still hold rights to anything under the Hogan brand? Was this part of an old divorce settlement being revived? But insiders were quick to clarify, the demand wasn't legal. Not yet. It was a public statement, a personal opinion, one that, had it been shared in private or at another time, might have earned understanding. But delivered on the heels of Hulk Hogan's death, with the wound still fresh and the world still processing, it felt more like exploitation than expression, and in wrestling, timing is everything. It wasn't long before WWE issued a subtle, careful response. In a press release meant to honor Hogan's legacy, they made no mention of Linda. No images of their wedding. No clips from their reality show Hogan Knows Best. The spotlight was squarely on Hogan, the wrestler, the icon, the man in the ring. The message was clear, this was about him. Not her. And fans seemed grateful for that. Comment sections under WWE's tribute posts were filled with messages saying, "Thank you for keeping it pure," and "Don't let anyone rewrite his ending." But the damage had already been done. Linda's words had reopened old wounds, not just for the Hogan family, but for fans who saw her as part of the legacy. Some had grown up watching her on TV, raising the Hogan children, supporting Terry during his grueling travel schedule. There was a time when fans saw the family as wrestling royalty, not just because of fame, but because they seemed like a unit. Now, all of that felt like a mirage. Was it all just for cameras? One fan asked on a Facebook group. Was she ever really about the man, or just the brand? Still, others tried to defend her. A small but vocal group on social media pointed out that Linda had endured years of alleged infidelity, neglect, and emotional exhaustion being married to a global superstar whose fame sometimes eclipsed his home life. They argued that while the timing was poor, her feelings may be justified. "She's bitter, yes," one user commented, "but don't forget what she lived through. You don't get over 25 years of chaos just because the world puts a halo on someone when they die." That comment sparked another war of replies. The central theme echoed again and again, there's a time and place. And this wasn't it. The Hogan children, Brooke and Nick, remained largely silent. Brooke posted a black and white image of herself and her father hugging backstage, captioned with a broken heart emoji and the words, "I'll love you forever." Nick, more withdrawn, shared nothing but a picture of Hogan walking alone toward the curtain before a match, his back to the camera. No words. No drama. Just respect. Neither acknowledged Linda's comments, and perhaps that silence said more than any official statement could. They, like millions of others, seemed to be choosing reverence over rehashing old pain. Behind closed doors, sources say the Hogan family was devastated by the backlash. Not against Hulk. Against what his memory was being forced to compete with. One close friend of the family, speaking anonymously, said, "This was supposed to be a celebration of a man who gave his body, his career, and his soul to fans. And now the headlines are about a demand. A payout. It's disgraceful." Linda, for her part, seemed unbothered, at least on the surface. She posted again, doubling down. In a now-deleted tweet, she wrote, "You don't get to erase me from history just because he's gone." Screenshots of the post went viral before she could remove it. If her goal was to spark a conversation, she succeeded. But it wasn't the conversation she likely hoped for. Because now, Hulkamania was angry, fans began boycotting her public appearances. She was booked to speak at a reality TV event in California later that month, an appearance she quietly withdrew from after organizers reported a flood of protest messages. Wrestling merchandise pages were flooded with comments demanding that all proceeds from posthumous Hogan gear go to charity or his children, not anyone else. A petition even circulated online demanding that WWE formally distance itself from Linda Hogan, a bizarre but telling sign of how personal this had become for the fanbase. And in all the noise, one thing became painfully clear: this wasn't just about money. This was about legacy. About memory. About how people mourn. And whether or not Linda Hogan had every legal right to speak, the public had made its emotional judgment. They didn't want division. They didn't want demands. They wanted to remember their hero, not argue over his ghost. This was a man who had been cheered by millions, who slammed Andre the Giant in front of 93,000 fans, who told an entire generation to say their prayers and take their vitamins. Hulk Hogan had transcended the ring. He had become a cultural figure, as much a part of Americana as muscle cars and bandanas. And now, in death, he had earned one final wish: to be remembered for the fight, not the fallout. But in the shadows of tribute, there was a storm. A debate about respect. About timing. About whether a fractured love story still had claim to a man's final chapter, and Linda Hogan, whether fairly or not, had become the villain of that debate. For days, the digital outcry showed no signs of slowing. Comment sections on wrestling pages turned into battlegrounds. It wasn't just fans reacting anymore, it was podcasters, influencers, journalists, and former wrestlers weighing in, offering their own versions of the truth. One veteran wrestler, speaking under the veil of anonymity, confessed in a podcast that the reaction felt like the curtain being pulled back on something people had wanted to ignore. According to him, the Hogan family had always been a powder keg, and Linda's timing just happened to light the fuse. The line between public grief and private pain blurred in real time. Everyone had an opinion. Everyone had a side. And Linda Hogan, whether she intended to or not, had placed herself directly in the center of the firestorm. To some, she was the wounded ex-wife finally voicing the resentment she'd bottled up for years. To others, she was the opportunist who chose fame and finances over dignity. But the weight of public perception is not easily shrugged off. The backlash began to manifest offline. A charity foundation linked to Linda Hogan reportedly began receiving calls from angry fans. Sponsors who had once used her as a legacy name began quietly distancing themselves. An endorsement deal she'd been negotiating, according to a close source, was abruptly paused pending internal review. And perhaps the most telling consequence of all came in the form of silence. No formal condolences came from WWE in her name, no acknowledgements in the tribute packages airing across their platforms. It was as though the company had excised her from Hulk Hogan's story entirely. But legacy is rarely so simple. The truth is, Linda Hogan was there during Hulk's prime. She was the woman behind the man when Hogan was tearing down Madison Square Garden, headlining WrestleMania, and redefining what a wrestling superstar could be. She was the mother of his children. She lived through the fame, the excess, the temptations, and the spotlight. In every documentary clip from the late 80s and early 90s, there she is, blonde, smiling, supportive, carrying the weight of being married to an icon whose character often overshadowed the man. But time hadn't been kind to their relationship. Their divorce in 2009 was ugly, venomous, and painfully public. Allegations of cheating, substance abuse, verbal abuse, all the familiar stains of celebrity breakups were dragged through the tabloids. And though both eventually found new paths, the shadows of that implosion never fully disappeared. Hulk moved on, remarried, and tried to rebuild his image. Linda, meanwhile, receded into the public eye, only appearing for reality TV cameos or occasional interviews about her past life with the wrestling megastar. That past had become a distant memory, until now, when Hulk Hogan died, the past came roaring back to life. And with it came the unresolved wounds. Fans didn't just see Linda's demand as a legal position, they saw it as an emotional betrayal. It felt to them like someone had returned to the funeral not to pay respects, but to read the will. The imagery was too powerful, too uncomfortable. And the court of public opinion had no patience for nuance. As the backlash mounted, so did the pressure. Linda's PR team issued a short statement days later, Mrs. Hogan deeply respects the legacy of Hulk Hogan and the impact he made in the wrestling world. Her comments were made during a moment of vulnerability and were not intended to offend fans or his memory. But by then, the fire had already spread. Screenshots of her original statements were circulating faster than the apology could reach them. Reaction videos flooded YouTube, with titles like "Linda Hogan just disgraced Hulk's legacy" and "The internet turns on Linda, and she deserves it." Thousands of views. Thousands of comments. And the sentiment remained unchanged. She had, in the eyes of many, crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. What few knew, however, was that Linda wasn't entirely alone in her pain. Privately, sources close to her described a woman who had carried more than she ever said. A woman who'd watched her marriage unravel under the crushing weight of fame, infidelity, and emotional abandonment. A woman who had raised her children under the spotlight while her husband was immortalized for his presence in a ring, not at the dinner table. People forget, one longtime friend said, that she lived through all of it. The glory and the rot. And now, she's being told she has no right to remember it out loud. But the pain of legacy is a two-edged sword. For the public, Hulk Hogan's memory is sacred. He is the one who told us to train hard, say our prayers, and believe in ourselves. The one who tore off his shirt to thunderous roars, who slammed giants and embodied larger-than-life courage. For fans, he wasn't just a man. He was a father figure, a childhood hero, a cultural giant. And death only amplified that illusion. When heroes die, we want clean endings. We want eulogies, not courtrooms. We want tributes, not transactions. And Linda's words had shattered that illusion in a way that felt personal to every Hulkamaniac watching. Even as the initial firestorm settled into simmering tension, the consequences lingered. Documentaries that were being fast-tracked about Hogan's life began editing around Linda's image. Licensing negotiations with WWE reportedly excluded any likeness or footage involving their reality show. One editor even admitted, "We were told to make it clean, focus on his in-ring legacy, not the drama." Fans may not have the power to rewrite history, but the WWE sure does. And they were making a clear statement. They were moving forward without her. In response, Linda's representatives tried again, this time with a pre-recorded video shared to her social platforms. Dressed in black, her tone more subdued, she said, "I never intended to make this about me. Hulk and I had a complicated story. We loved. We hurt. We lived through a world no one else can really understand. My comments came from a place of unresolved grief, and I apologize if they caused pain. That was never my goal." The video was viewed over 3 million times in 24 hours. But the comment section told a different story. "Too little, too late," read one. "You said what you meant the first time," read another. The wrestling world, often forgiving in its theatricality, was proving far less merciful in real life. Still, one has to ask, was the hatred entirely justified? Public figures live under a microscope. Every word dissected. Every emotion interpreted. And in grief, not everyone speaks with clarity. Some lash out. Some crumble. Some seek comfort. And some, like Linda Hogan, speak before they fully understand what they're feeling. It's easy to condemn from the outside. But it's harder to sit with the discomfort of knowing that the people we vilify may be hurting in ways we don't see. What's undeniable is this: the final chapter of Hulk Hogan's life was not written by him. It was written by the world that remembered him. And in that story, Linda Hogan became the unexpected antagonist. Not because of a crime, but because of a sentence, poorly timed and painfully delivered. And now, as the wrestling world turns its attention to tribute specials, Hall of Fame segments, and final farewells, Linda remains in the shadows, her role in Hulkamania forever questioned, forever fractured. She had once been part of the empire. But now, she stood outside its gates, locked out not by law, but by loyalty. The fans had spoken. The story had been told. And somewhere, beneath the red and yellow, beneath the cheers and tears, was a silence louder than any chant ever heard in an arena, because grief, when mishandled, doesn't just mourn the dead, it buries the living too. Outside the WWE sphere, the story had begun to take on a different form. Mainstream outlets picked it up, framing the controversy not just as a wrestling scandal, but as a cautionary tale about posthumous fame, complicated family legacies, and the perils of unresolved resentment. News anchors who had likely never stepped foot in a wrestling ring were now asking, was Linda Hogan justified in her claim? Morning talk shows turned it into roundtable debate fodder. Some psychologists weighed in, pointing to grief as a disorienting force. Others saw it as classic narcissism, a desperate grab for relevance under the guise of recognition. But while talking heads speculated and platforms argued, a quieter drama was unfolding behind the scenes, one that wouldn't trend, but mattered far more. It was Brooke Hogan who was left to bear the brunt of both legacies colliding. Sources close to the Hogan family revealed that Brooke, always seen as the peacemaker, the one who tried to balance loyalty to both parents, had broken down privately over the chaos. She had reportedly begged her mother not to make any public statements, knowing how fragile the moment was. "This is Dad's time," she allegedly texted her mother, "please don't make this about the past." But her plea, it seemed, was ignored, or at best, unheard. And so she watched, helpless, as her father's legacy was yanked back into the drama he spent his final years trying to escape. At a memorial event held quietly in Tampa, Florida, days after the announcement of Hogan's passing, Brooke appeared in all black, flanked by close family and longtime friends from the wrestling industry. She did not speak publicly. But one attendee noted how her hands trembled during the moment of silence. It was like she was holding back everything: grief, pain, anger. All of it. Linda was notably absent, and that absence said everything. Even those who sympathized with Linda's underlying pain couldn't ignore what it had cost her. Whatever goodwill might have remained from fans who grew up watching her as part of the Hogan household was now tainted, perhaps irreversibly. The demand, the words she'd spoken in that now infamous Instagram Live, had become etched into the timeline of Hulk Hogan's legacy like graffiti on a statue. The tragedy wasn't just that she had spoken too soon, the tragedy was that she had made herself unforgettable for all the wrong reasons. Legacy is a fragile thing. Hulk Hogan had spent the better part of his last decade rebuilding his. After scandal, after lawsuits, after being exiled from WWE, he had slowly clawed his way back into the hearts of many. He wasn't perfect, but he was human. A man who had lived an extraordinary, public life, and who had tried, in his final years, to find peace with it. In that pursuit, there was something poetic. But what Linda did, intentionally or not, was fracture that poetry. She disrupted the quiet moment the world had carved out to say goodbye. And in doing so, she inadvertently reminded everyone that even death doesn't silence every voice. Some speak louder in absence. Others scream inappropriately into the morning, and some, like Linda, seem unable to distinguish between memory and entitlement. Back in California, WWE continued its tribute rollout. Limited edition merchandise was launched. A Hogan tribute episode was planned. Wrestlers shared stories about him backstage, stories about his mentorship, his showmanship, his obsessive attention to crowd reaction, his prayers before matches, and the way he used to say, "Always leave 'em louder than they came in." But notably, not a single tribute mentioned his family life, not his marriage, not Linda, only the man in the ring, the myth, the red and yellow giant who tore through a generation and made the world believe in larger-than-life heroes, because for wrestling fans, the ring is sacred ground. And whatever happens outside of it, whatever pain, betrayal, or bitterness unfolds in private, does not belong in the squared circle. The crowd doesn't cheer for the messy details. They cheer for the entrance. For the slam. For the comeback. And in death, fans hoped for the ultimate comeback, one final celebration of the Hulkster, free of scandal, free of feud. Instead, they were dragged into an argument, and that betrayal, for many, was unforgivable. In the days that followed, a cultural shift began to unfold. Legacy wrestling accounts began replacing older Hogan family clips with solo highlights. YouTube channels that once featured the Hogan Knows Best reality show began disabling comments to avoid the Linda backlash. A fan campaign was started under the hashtag #HonorHulkNotDrama, pushing for all posthumous profits to go toward charities supporting youth wrestling or spinal surgery patients, a cause close to Hogan's final years, and slowly, the noise began to fade, not because people forgot, but because they refused to give more power to the person who had tried to rewrite the ending. Linda, now effectively sidelined, had retreated from public view. Her team claimed she was taking time to grieve privately, but the damage was already in motion. A TMZ report later revealed she had reached out to WWE's legal team through intermediaries, hoping to discuss image rights, archived footage usage, and legacy payments related to her appearances in the early 2000s. WWE, per sources, declined to engage. They had moved on, the ring had closed, and Hogan's legacy, now bathed in gold and red and roars and nostalgia, would continue forward, without her, because for all her claims about having built the man, the fans knew the truth. Hulk Hogan was made in the ring, and that's where he belonged, even in death. As time passed, the storm finally began to quiet. But even silence has its own kind of weight. In the weeks following Hulk Hogan's death, WWE aired a special tribute episode, one that many fans now refer to as the Final Roar. The event was a poignant blend of nostalgia and honor. From the roaring crowd at Madison Square Garden to the echo of his iconic theme song blasting through the arena one final time, it was everything a legend deserved. No mention was made of the controversy that had shadowed the days prior. No commentary on the feud that had erupted behind the curtain. Just Hulk Hogan, as he was always meant to be remembered, standing tall, flexing through the screen, immortal and memoried. In a backstage segment that aired after the show, a teary-eyed John Cena shared a private memory. "He told me once," Cena said, "that the loudest cheer he ever heard wasn't at WrestleMania. It was the first time his daughter told him she was proud of him." The crowd fell silent. Cena's voice cracked. That was the real man. Not just the performer. It was a subtle but piercing contrast to everything unfolding behind closed doors. Because while the world was healing through tribute, the Hogan family was still reeling through silence. No further statement came from Linda. Whether due to strategy, shame, or exhaustion, she disappeared from the media landscape entirely. And with her silence came a reckoning, not just from the public, but from those who had once defended her. Former friends began to distance themselves. Interviews were cancelled. Invitations retracted. And in the influencer circles she once moved in, her name began to fade. It wasn't hatred anymore. It was omission. And for someone who had once lived in the spotlight, that was perhaps the most painful sentence of all. Brooke Hogan, meanwhile, re-emerged days later in a tearful, pre-recorded video on her father's official tribute website. She didn't speak of the controversy. She didn't mention her mother. She spoke only of her dad. "He wasn't perfect," she said, wiping her eyes. "But he loved harder than anyone I knew. He loved the fans, he loved wrestling, and when he loved you, really loved you, he would move mountains for you. That's who I lost. My mountain." It was the statement that fans had been waiting for. Not from WWE. Not from celebrities. From his daughter. From someone who had lived through the chaos but still chose to remember the man beneath the legend. The video went viral within hours. Clips were reshared by everyone from Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson to Ric Flair, each adding their own reflections, their own memories. But in every post, in every comment, one name was notably absent: Linda. The backlash had done more than burn bridges. It had isolated her completely, and yet, if one looks closer, there's a sadness buried beneath the rage. Because in truth, Linda Hogan did lose something too. Not just the father of her children. Not just the man she once loved. She lost her place in the story. In choosing to speak too soon, in the wrong tone, and at the worst possible moment, she ensured that her final chapter in the public eye would be one of controversy, not closure. Her demand, whether meant as justice or just a cry of frustration, became her epitaph in the Hogan legacy. Not the decades beside him. Not the memories behind the curtain. Just one moment, frozen in judgment, and maybe that's the real tragedy. Because grief is messy. It doesn't wait for scripts or good lighting. It doesn't follow rules. But in the world of wrestling, timing is everything. And Linda Hogan's timing was fatal. Behind the scenes, however, WWE insiders revealed that the company had quietly extended support to the Hogan children. A portion of posthumous merchandise sales was earmarked for a foundation in Hulk's name, with Brooke reportedly involved in its planning. The goal, they said, was simple: keep Hulkamania alive for future generations. Without the noise. And so, in a poetic full circle, Hulk Hogan became exactly what he had been in his prime, larger than life, untouched by the drama that chased him when the camera stopped rolling. The fans got what they needed. Closure. Tribute. A final chance to cheer one last time. The chants of Hogan. Hogan. Hogan rang out across arenas again, this time not as a call for entrance.